the guy with 5 talents. He's praised the guy with 2 talents. And then we come to verse 24, and he says, Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee, that thou art an hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast that is thine. And his Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant. Whew. That's tough. He just told everyone else, well done, thou good and faithful. This guy, not so positive. He says, thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sow not, and gather where I have not strowed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put the money to the exchangers, and then coming I receive mine own with usury. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it to him which hath 10 talents, and so on and so forth. Now, here's the thing. This guy with 1 talent, did he start out intending to be a wicked and slothful servant? No, of course not. When he was given that talent, his intention was not, I am going to do nothing with this. His goal was, man, this is a big responsibility. This is a lot. I've got to figure out what I'm going to do with it. And he hid it, so he was afraid someone was going to steal it or that was going to get lost. And in the intention of protecting that money, ultimately, the reality is that with the best of intentions, that most people fail miserably at life, because intentions do not equal success. I remember I first heard this quote with the company that I worked for, and one of the things that they emphasize is, look, it's not that people get hired and they have this horrible mindset that, man, I just don't want to do anything. I just want to be lazy and I want to rip off the company and I don't want to do any work for them. That's never the intention. The intention is, man, I'm going to do great. I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to be very successful here. I'm going to really help this company. The problem is that an intention without a plan is just a wish. And a lot of times in our lives, our intentions can become exactly that. You know, we all start the year with goals, with plans. Maybe our plan is we want to spend more time playing sports with our kids. Maybe we want to exercise more or spend more time eating together as a spouse and spend more time with them. Maybe less screens for our kid. You know, we don't want our kid watching TV all the time. And so we start out the year and we're like, all right, now we're going to X off these days and kids are going to have no screens on these days. Maybe it's, I'm going to turn my cell phone off more. I'm just not going to spend so much time on social media, Facebook, texting. I'm going to turn my cell phone off at a certain time every day. Maybe we want to do a better job of just attending church regularly. Maybe that's our priority. Or maybe it's, I'm going to not eat at drive-thru anymore. You know, maybe I'm going to cut drive-thru out of my life. And maybe that's our intention. And yet the reality is that while we all want to excel in our responsibilities and in those priorities, many times our intentions are a little more than a wish. They never get any traction because we're never able to put the plan in motion to help us fulfill and meet those expectations that we have. You know, it's interesting. In Philippians chapter 3, verses 13 and 14, Paul said this. Paul said, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are before, and reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. He said, this one thing I do. Now, when you read that, it catches you a little bit off guard. And the reason is because Paul did a million things in his life. The dude was always busy. He was always traveling, starting churches, praying for people, writing books of the Bible. I mean, the man was extremely busy and extremely successful. And yet in his mind, he had figured out to do one thing mindset. I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to do it right. And when you do what Paul recommends, what you'll find is that everything else starts falling in place and taking care of themselves. So, how do we do that? How do we have that kind of a mindset? What was the one thing that Paul was able to do, and what does that look like when we do that in our own lives? That's what we're going to look at this evening. Now, before we can do that, we have to understand, why do our priorities get messed up in the first place? Why is it that we don't do a good job trying to do the things we want to do a good job at? Well, Paul said it this way. He said, the things that I want to do, I don't do them. And the things I don't want to do, I end up doing them. And he blamed it on self. He said, it's because I've got this old man, I've got this selfish side of me that drags me back every single time. And the reality is all of us have that in our life. We have something that just sort of pulls us down. It may be what's called mental conditioning. What is mental conditioning? That sounds fancy. It just means it's the way you were raised. A lot of times, the way that we were raised has a big effect in the way that we pursue life. That's the way my daddy did it. That's the way my mommy did it. That's the way my brother did it. That's the way our church has always done it. That's the way our family has always done it. And you can get into a routine where we do it a certain way because that's just what we do. It may not be efficient. It may be the most inefficient way possible, but that's just the way we've always done it. And so we stick to it. Some of us have routines that are not healthy routines, but it's just that's what we do. You know, my dad has a routine where he will come home late at night and he will eat an entire gallon of sherbet. Now, I don't know why. He thinks sherbet is more healthy than ice cream, but when you eat a gallon of it, it ceases to be healthy. So I'm not sure exactly why my dad does that, but that's a habit that he has. He just, some days he comes home, goes to the freezer, grabs out that sherbet, sits down and eats the whole gallon in one sit. I don't know why my dad does that. It's extremely unhealthy. Now, he also bikes 50 miles every morning, and so I guess maybe that offsets the sherbet. But my point is that sometimes in our lives, we just get into weird habits that just stick, and it's just what we do. And we have to be willing to look at those things and say, wait, I understand this is what I've always done. I understand this is what I'm used to doing. But is this the best way to do it? Or is there some things that could be changed? Sometimes it's community influence that changes this. Our culture can affect our mental conditioning. Our culture can affect us in a certain way. When we see commercials on TV, you see that new gadget, that new gizmo, and there's just something in your mind. You're like, oh, that looks good. Man, I kind of want that. My kids would love that. And we see it. We've been mentally conditioned for it. And now in the world of social media, you get on Facebook and they tailor make those ads for you, right? Your interests are all over the place. And so it can draw you in. It can condition you to pull you into something that maybe you don't need to be doing. Maybe you're not spending the time that you need to be spending because of influence from community or even from media. But not only mental conditioning, but also sometimes it can be a lack of awareness. Now, that's a really nice way of saying ignorance or stupidity. But sometimes we just don't know that we're not fulfilling our priorities. We really don't. We don't think about the fact that I have to spend time with my kid to actually them all the time. But if you asked your kid, they'd be like, I mean, sometimes. And you're like, what are you doing? I was with you like 2 weeks ago. And they're like, yeah, 2 weeks ago. And you're like, has it been 2 weeks? I guess it has been 2 weeks, hasn't it? See how sometimes it's just, we don't think about it. It's just not intentional, and it's not right in front of us, and so we can lose track of time, and we can lose those kinds of things. We can have all the intentions of going out on dates with our spouse and not realize that it's been 3 weeks since our last date with our spouse. That's just kind of how life is sometimes. False incentives. This is a big one. Sometimes we weigh our short term versus our long term, and we go for the short term every single time. I'll give you a simple illustration of this. If you've got $50 extra for the month and you're like, man, you know what? I'm gonna for this week, I've got 50 extra bucks. I'm going to take my wife out. Now, you could do that. Or you could take that $50 and you could put it in a savings account. And you say, well, why would I do that? Well, if you put $50 in a savings account every week for 52 weeks, by the end of the year, you have $2,600. Well, that's not a bad amount of change. I mean, that's pretty decent. You do that for 10 years, you got $26,000. Well, now we're getting up there. Now, if you invest that money, you come out somewhere around $44,000, depending on how you invest it. But the reality is that if you think through that $50 a week, it can go a lot further than you realize in that moment. But sometimes in that moment, it's like, man, I got $50. Let's go eat. Let's go buy a steak dinner. Let's go do something fun. Actually, $50 gets you, McDonald's at this point. But you know what I mean. So sometimes the short term just is so much more appealing than the long-term incentives. And we have to think that through in our lives and develop our mindset in that way. And then there's the perceived urgency. Oftentimes what we have scheduled that we know is in priority in our life, we get pulled away from for something that is perceived as urgent. Everyone else's problems is always urgent. Nobody ever calls you with a problem you can do later. No one's ever like, hey, could you come over, 2 weeks from now and fix my plumbing? That'd be great. People have problems. They want it solved right now, and they want this done instantly. And sometimes we have to be wise enough to say, you know what? This is the priority. That's maybe seems urgent, but it can wait. I need to get this priority done first of something that somebody else deems urgent or tries to make me